Hope it doesn't cut off my head. So, I'll miss those specific days, and already I'm remiss because I wanted to do veracity, and I'm going to do veracity today. But when I do veracity, I always give you those graphs, and without the graphs, it's hard to follow along, but I'll draw it on the board because I want to do veracity of Matthew specifically. But in any case, this is the second part of Matthew, and I think everyone has been in the class so far. You may pick up new ones, but in any case, this is the other part of Matthew, and I'm gonna clean up the part that we missed. Matter of fact, I gave you the outline, and I'm probably gonna squish this even more because the first one is supposed to be introduction. I want to do course outline, the veracity, and the mysterion introduction, and then the second one I had logos to telos and mysterion. But what I'm going to do is I'll probably move up the dialogue to finish up to the review, so we can finish those parts and get to the third discourse, which is a collection of parables. So we'll be squishing those together. Probably the narrative 19 and 22, I'll just squish that. And but the Passion Resurrection narrative, I'll probably give more time to that. In any case, I thought I'd have a lot of time to cover this subject, and I obviously don't. But that's the way it goes. So you've got the handouts for every class up in the front of the door every time. And like I said, I try to give you important information, and this I should have put the chart. In any case, I'll have to draw it on the board. So I'm not going to start right back at the beginning, but I'm going to give you just a little bit of review of some of the things that we're talking about. So in this class specifically, this class is not a class about theology or doctrine. It's rather about the history, the literature, and the culture of the times. Because, in my opinion, how are you going to figure out what your theology and doctrine is if you don't know what the words say? So that's what we look at specifically is the words. The history, the culture, the literature. And I don't do doctrine, but I will answer questions about it. If you bring it up, usually I'll identify that, and I don't have a problem talking about historical theology or doctrine, but I don't like to give opinions. So whatever I say isn't my opinion. I have sources for whatever I communicate to you. I can provide you those sources if you need to. I say about every teacher, check what they tell you. Because who knows what they're telling you. But I can assure you that what I am teaching or talking about are not opinions. As a matter of fact, you probably don't care about my opinions. And you know what? I don't really care about your opinions. Because when we look at history and culture and literature, it doesn't matter what our opinions are. What matters is what are the facts. That's the whole point, right? So again, when we look at, for example, Matthew, we're not looking at what the opinions of people have been. I don't even look at commentaries. Very rarely. Sometimes I'll look at, like, for example, an educated secondary source. But sources are what we're going to talk about today. Because sources are really important. As a matter of fact, sources are critical. And we'll find out what that means. So, the overall point of this class is to look at the times, the culture, the actual meaning of the Greek text. And that's the point. We're studying Greek text because Matthew is written in Greek. And it's not even modern Greek. It's a Greek that we call Koinonia Greek. Koinonia Greek means a universal kind of Greek. It's not a special spiritual Greek. It's not a special biblical Greek. It is a universal Greek language that was used in that time. Kind of like universal English is today. Although universal English is a little better in terms of it's more cohesive. Well, maybe that's not true. Because Koinonia Greek comes directly from Athenian classical Greek. Now what you need to realize is that you know how people talk funny in other parts of the country? Some people even think you might talk funny. Well, these are called dialects. And different languages have different dialects. For example, can you imagine the dialects in ancient Greece? Ancient Greece was city-states. So you had Thrace, you had Macedonia, you had Sparta, you had Athens. Somebody who was from Athens could be detected because of their dialogue. not just their accent, but the words they use. And the same thing's true. Someone from the South says you all. Someone from Pennsylvania says youans, right? These are dialectical differences that are in English that we use differently. And if you go to England, it's not your trunk, it's your boot, right? It's not a flashlight, it's a torch. It's not an elevator, it's a lift. So word usage and even to some degree grammar can change. So when we talk about Koinonia Greek, we're talking about basically Latin classical Greek. So when I teach this class, one of my chief sources is Woodhouse. Woodhouse is the encyclopedia or dictionary of classical Greek. So, well, I'll just ask you a question. It's a simple question. When Matthew and Paul and these other writers wrote these Greek documents, they used Koinonia Greek, right? But Koinonia Greek was based on Athenian classical Greek. So what do you think they were using as the text or the understanding for their Greek? Classical Athenian Greek. That only makes sense to me. So therefore, when they say an ecclesia, and by the way, the ecclesia is the word that's translated church, most often in the New Testament documents. The ecclesia is the Athenian democracy. What did Jewish people call their convocation in the first century? Their group, they're coming together. Synagogue. That's right, synagogue. Today the word comes down to us as synagogue. It's a Greek word. It's not a Hebrew word. A synagogue means a gathering of people under a leader. They're like I can identify 10, but there's probably about 20 or 30 Greek words that mean to assemble. Because every single group, every single city-state had a different name for its assembly. The name for the assembly in Athens was the ecclesia. So when Paul wrote, and Luke wrote, and Matthew wrote, and they wrote ecclesia instead of synagogue, what did you think they mean? What did they mean? They meant the ecclesia, whatever that is, right? In Athenian thought, it's a gathering of equals, peers. Isn't that an amazing word? Why didn't they use the word synagogue? Because they didn't mean synagogue. You see this?
Because there was no leader. Did you not say synagogue was a gathering of people with a leader?
That's right. And so, where did the early church the early church is Jewish. Where did they worship? Synagogue. The synagogue. Yeah, they did worship at the temple, and that's a beautiful thought because we don't think much about that. Why doesn't it tell us? Well, actually, we have a couple of allusions in especially Acts and Corinthians and some other places where they do allude to the teen hodos, to the early church going and worshiping in synagogues. And in the temple, by the way, in Acts especially. But why didn't they write it down a lot?
Because it was a common thing. Everybody knew it.
That's right. It's common. Everybody knew it. But instead, why did they mention the word ecclesia in relation to the early church? Because it was new and it was a special thing. Because whatever is the ecclesia, whatever is the Athenian democracy in the minds of those people, is what they imagined the early church, separate from that synagogue, should be. So that's the way we look at things. That's the way we have to look at things. That's how we have to look at the text. And that's why we dig into them. And that's why the word of the day is one of my favorite words in the whole of the Greek lexicon. This is the most important word, M-U-S-T-E-R-I-O-N. This is the most important word that you're going to find in the New Testament. It's mentioned more times than the ecclesia. It is mistranslated every time you see it. The reason, and I'm going to give a little introduction to the Mysterion, because it is so important. Let's just look at the word. Let's see, I think I have the note for you here. This is from a derivative of muo, And basically, we've seen this word because if you remember, the word moron that was used in the Sermon on the High Place, on the Mount, was specifically derived from this word. It means someone who can't speak or won't speak. Now, in Greek thought, won't speak and can't speak are kind of the same. Kind of the same. So, to them, a person who can't speak. Remember, what did the Greeks call a person that couldn't speak Greek?
Barbarian.
A barbarian. And so a person who won't speak or can't speak is what? Well, a little bit different than a barbarian, but that's a good, connection. Because, basically a person who is not refined, not able to participate within their culture, not able to participate within their society. So the word has become a derogatory word to us, right? Moron. That's where the word comes from. But the word's origins are muo, which muo is mysterion, the idea of the silence. Muo means literally to shut the mouth. And it's a silence. It literally means, mysterion means literally the silence imposed by initiation into religious rites. The silence imposed during initiation into religious rites. That's what mysterion means. This word is translated in our Bibles to be mystery or secrets. Now, does mystery or secrets sound like the idea of silence imposed by initiation into religious rites? If you translate it mystery or secrets, do you think you'll miss the point? And by the way, every time you see the word used, that is muo, moron, moranos, any form of this word, what do you think it's pointing to? It's pointing to the mysterion. Because the mysterion at this point, and I'm going to get into this, is the most important thing going on in Greek thought right now. And by the way, if it's important in Greek thought, who else is important to it?
The rest of the world.
Everyone else in the Hellenized world. That is exactly right. Otherwise, why would they have theaters, gymnasiums? We call them gymnasiums in Jerusalem, for example. Or why would they have a hippodrome, which is where they race the horses, in Jerusalem? Or an amphitheater in Jerusalem? Because you realize, of course, you do realize this. Theaters, hippodromes, arenas, and what's the other thing I mentioned? Amphitheaters. What do they all have in common in Greek thought?
Entertainment.
What's that?
Entertainment.
Religion. We think it's entertainment because we go to the theater for entertainment. Why do the Greeks go to the theater? It's a religion. It's a religion. So when they're teaching your kids Greek plays, they're teaching them religious plays because all Greek plays are religious.
How did that work for the hippodrome?
In Greek thought, the things that were being shown were pantheons to the gods. And so they were all dedicated to the gods. Many times, remember, dedicated to the emperor, who was the what? Deified, reigning emperor, you see. So the hippodromes were especially are pantheons in pantheonic paganism. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I hope we get there. Because what I want to do is the first thing I want to do is, Let's talk about this. First of all, what have we discovered about Matthew? It's a very simple document, right, of just pithy sayings. No. The exact opposite. Very complex document. Very detailed. The words of Christ are what? Parabola, parables, and irony. Hyperbola, mixed with cultural commentary. Why do you think he mixed his comments with cultural commentary? What's that?